Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Mario Armas, a therapist at Wellspring, and the host of today's show about why mental health support is important in the military. And joining me today, we have Mark Macgowan and we have Meredith Puddington. How are the two of you doing?
Great, thank you.
Feeling great. Thanks, Mario.
Absolutely. Great to have you here and looking forward to this very pertinent discussion. Just speaking to you previously, both of you have a wealth of information that I think could be of benefit to our listeners regarding the military. And something that struck me is just the reality of how many people participate in the military, being active members, family members. It was such a striking stat that according to the US Census, there's a report that roughly 18 million veterans and 2.1 million active duty and reserve military personnel are currently, enrolled. And more than 6% of the US population have served or are serving in the military. However, this statistics fails to capture the even greater number of family members affected by military service. So just this number alone, it's so staggering that the mental health implications need to be broached. So now I'm gonna let two of our guests, both Meredith and Mark, introduce themselves. And Meredith, if you could please start us off.
Yes, thank you, Mario. So my name is Meredith Puddington. I'm a registered clinical mental health intern working with Wellspring. Prior to becoming a therapist here, I served in the Coast Guard for 5 years after graduating from the Coast Guard Academy. My first assignment was actually as a student engineer on board the Coast Guard cutter Polar Star, which is based out of Seattle. During that assignment, we conducted annual 3.5-month deployments to conduct ice-breaking operations in Antarctica. After that, I moved to Miami and I was working here as a construction manager, overseeing some major Coast Guard construction projects throughout the southeastern United States. I ended up getting out last May after the birth of my son. And my husband is currently still serving in the Coast Guard, along with many friends and family members throughout different military branches. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. And Mark, welcome. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Mario. I'm a licensed therapist with Wellspring, and my clinical interest is working with survivors and responders to mass casualty events, including the military, the police, and fire rescue personnel. I've had some specialized training and experience in trauma response, including psychological first aid and what we call EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. I also serve as a behavioral health specialist on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Disaster Medical Assistance Team. I would also like to add, very importantly, that my father was a veteran of the Navy of the United Kingdom in World War II, serving in the South Pacific. So it's an honor to be here.
It's great to have you, Mark, and Meredith as well. And there's such a variety of topics that we could discuss, but when it comes to what's prevalent, what would you say, Meredith, are the prevalent mental health concerns in the military?
Well, I'll start off with how prevalent they are. Several years back, I had the opportunity to do sort of an internship shadowing at a Coast Guard clinic to see sort of the medical side of how things work. And I was kind of astounded to find how many people came in with mental health concerns to the clinic to address physical needs. So, for example, someone might come in because they're having issues sleeping. And then they go on to tell the doctor, oh, my wife and I are also going through a divorce. So this is probably very much interrelated to the fact that I can't sleep. Or somebody else coming in, they might be cutting themselves or having extreme anxiety about going underway, which is resulting in a physical symptom, which is what they're coming in for, but they really need mental health assistance. And so that experience is something that really led me to becoming a counselor, just realizing the very big need that is out there for mental health support, especially in the military. The
Yes.
National Alliance on Mental Health actually estimates that nearly 1 in 4 active duty members show signs of some sort of mental health condition. And Mark is going to get into the specifics on that a little bit later. So I think that's important to remember, but also it's not just what we see on the surface as far as, PTSD, people in war zones, which is a
Yes.
big deal and that's a big thing. But they're also finding that military members can be exposed to a variety of potentially other traumatizing experiences. One example of this is the Coast Guard does the mission of search and rescue. And so when you're working somewhere like Station Golden Gate and people are jumping off the bridge and people are conducting the search and rescue, these members are encountering 2 to 3 people a week jumping off the bridge. And so if you can just imagine the secondary trauma of our military members in that area, or first responders for that matter, as part of their active everyday duties. But we'd also like to point out, and we'll talk a bit more about this later, that active duty members are also at risk for non-military related trauma. And so what we're talking about here is interpersonal violence, physical and sexual abuse, and things of that nature. And it's not exactly clear why they seem to be more at risk for these types of things. I have some ideas. Perhaps it could be related to the military culture or the environment. From day one, you're trained to say, yes, sir, no, sir. So if somebody tells you to do something that maybe is taking advantage of you, they might not feel like they can say no because of that environment or culture. And you're also taught to just sacrifice all your personal needs for that of the team. So you can see how people could really take advantage of someone in that situation, and they could be exposed to all sorts of different trauma.
Wow. Yeah. And that highly structured environment where it's absolute compliance, that can be one of the contributing factors to subsequent concerns. And when it comes to common mental health concerns among service members, Mark, what would you say those are?
Yeah, I want to add to what Meredith had said as well. I think she highlighted that military environments, military is very heterogeneous. So you have very broad experiences. We have different branches of the military, we have different levels of the military, all that. So the experiences that we're going to talk about don't necessarily apply to every service member or veteran, but we're trying to, discuss some of the major factors. So in thinking about some of the mental health concerns, it was a little touched on about the deployment the service members have. There's sort of a cycle of deployment. So you've got pre-deployment. And so if we're talking about active military being deployed, you've got some of the issues, the demands from family for, extra time before you're deployed. Then you get deployed, the separation from family, adjusting to the routine and the responsibilities of being out there, regaining the battle mind skills that help you survive in combat, but also learning about no personal space or control of your own schedule, which can lead to some ways of managing that in deployments, including substance use. Post-deployment, where those battle mind skills may have been very appropriate and effective in combat, may cause some problems if they're not adapted when you get home. So there's sort of a readjustment and reintegration. So those are the normal things that one would experience in terms of that whole deployment process. And you can just imagine, as we've kind of touched on a little bit, there's some expected issues that may come up in those transitions as you come back from a very highly structured environment into an environment that doesn't require that structure.
Right.
And there were more, when you get into more specific kind of things that may be more problematic, the biggest things we know about are PTSD and depression, which affects maybe 10 to 20% of US service members. who were deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, had PTSD or depression. We have the other factors that we've seen over time, over many decades, what they call the 1,000-yard stare, that blank stare, unfocused. They named that in World War II for the process where people became very detached from what they were experiencing. And of course, there's also what we call moral injury, which is when you have a bad command situation where you're ordered to do things that really break the moral fabric that you were taught is normal, even in combat. And so there's this other level, apart from the physical part, apart from what you've seen, but also really addressing things that are really beyond what you thought you signed up for. And other things, that traumatic brain injury, the physical injuries, and the sequelae of a TBI. We mentioned substance use, interpersonal violence we talked about, and we can't ignore the high rates of suicide among people who are deployed, and those who are also serving as in returned and are now retired and returned home.
Yeah, no, thank you both for what you've provided thus far when it comes to, that process of returning, and then from one environment with all these characteristics to suddenly coming back to oftentimes a highly unstructured one. So,
Yeah, I'd like to just cut in there too. And because Mark, I think that's a really great point that I hadn't thought of before. But going from that structured deployment cycle, one thing that I noticed in the Coast Guard is when you were underway and you had like your structured schedule, which is 7 days a week, and you're out for like a month or two, and then all of a sudden you pull into a port call, I would notice like a lot of the crew members would go straight to the bar and drink excessively. So just to, again, highlight that point of the substance abuse, like building those habits of you're in a high stress environment for so long. And then the way that they cope with it when they get off or when they get home is they turn to the substances.
Yeah. It's amazing how you were able to see that, Meredith, in terms of the tension and then their need for release manifested by that. So we're definitely going to continue in discussing struggles revolving around the military and some interventions and modalities that could best serve that community. So we will be back in a few moments. Thank you both. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. And this is Mario Armas. If you're just joining our show, our topic is why mental health support is important in the military. And I'm being joined by Mark Macgowan and Meredith Puddington. Thus far, we've discussed an array of topics. And just moving on to the next point of discussion, Meredith, I definitely wanted to ask you about some of the struggles that women face in the military and some of your experiences on that front.
Hey, that's a great question. So I think one important point I wanted to bring up is that there's been a historic gender discrimination just because this is a primarily male-dominated field in the past. So even up to 1976, women were actually discharged from the military for having or adopting a child. So if you can just imagine that. And then up until the 90s, most occupations in the military were not open to women. So I think because of that culture and environment that's historical, there's this pressure for a lot of women to prove themselves, especially physically, and not have any physical limitations. So you can imagine that's difficult when you're trying to get pregnant or something like that. And I think a lot of women tend to just decide not to go the family route because it seems like more women in the military are less likely to be married than their male counterparts. And we know that is a fact. So either women are choosing not to get married at all, but then for those who are married, almost half of them are married to other service members. So there's also a desire to be married to someone who understands what you're going through and understands the military culture and lifestyle. In addition to that, I think sometimes it's just the feeling of being alone. And I know
Mm,
men can experience that too, for sure. Even when you're on a boat full of people or on a deployment, that feeling of loneliness. One of my good friends, when she left the academy, her first assignment was on board a cutter where there was only one other female officer on board.
mm.
So it's kind of like, well, I hope you like each other because you're going to be roommates
Right.
and likely
Right.
do all your port calls together. So there's just that lack of other women to really bond with sometimes. And then I think there's also the point of being minimalized or sometimes ostracized. Like I know in my experience, I've been called sweetheart by other professionals, especially as an engineer, which is completely inappropriate. But a lot of women deal with that sort of thing. And then also a big thing is sexual assault. They estimate that 20 to 43% of female service members have had military sexual trauma. And that's a pretty big number, especially
That
when you
is
think
a
about the fact that
staggering
most
number.
women will not report it. So that's huge.
Wow. That is a staggering number. And then Meredith, you were saying something regarding the the sexual assault that you wanted to elaborate on further, I believe.
I think another important point is that one study found that 21% of active duty women had experienced sexual assault from partners during military service. So it was their actual partners. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that just goes to show that, these active duty members are at risk for other types of trauma that may not have to do with the being in the service itself, if that makes sense.
And just like the previous stat, they go unreported oftentimes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Meredith, what other challenges would you say exist for military families?
Oh, goodness. So this is something I'm in the process of learning about because I'm obviously married to someone in the Coast Guard. And now we have a toddler and we have another one on the way. And my husband is about to change jobs, likely to go back underway for a longer period of time. So I think one very important thing to remember is that it's never just an individual who's serving. It is the entire family system. And one of the biggest challenges that is reported for military families is the constant moving. Because you have to remember, these families are moving every 2 to 3 years. They're being completely uprooted into a new place away from their support system. And for kids, that means they might change schools 6 to 9 times by the time they graduate high school, which is hard for children. But then you also think about the spouse, because the military member, they move, but they're immediately going into a new job with a whole new set of people. So they immediately have this whole new support system and a group of people and a job that's meaningful. Whereas the spouse is kind of sometimes left floundering. Like, what do? I got to make new friends. I got to, find a church, build a new support system. So that's a big concern for families. I think another really big challenge is maintaining a healthy marriage. If you think about it, relationships are primarily about connection and communication. When you have one service member who's away or deployed for a long time, obviously it's hard to communicate. And then when they get home or whatever the case may be, you may not have a babysitter in the new area so that you can go on a date and connect with your spouse. And as a single parent, essentially, while your spouse is gone, you develop routines that work for you and the kids. And then all of a sudden your spouse comes back and all of that is disrupted. So a lot of spouses may feel bitter about having to deal with all those responsibilities at home.
Thank you so much, Meredith. So we had lost Mark momentarily, but he has joined us once more, right on time to actually talk about assessments and counseling approaches that could help with military members or veterans. So Mark, welcome back, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, I just want to say that what Meredith had shared earlier makes me think of this ripple effect, that we're not just looking at the military service member, but we're looking at their family. You're also looking at the experiences outside of the combat areas in which they're serving as well. So we really have to think broader than just the service member on deployment. So I do want to touch on some of the ways in which we can find out whether the concerns are ones in which we need some help. So I think it's really important that everyone does, including those of us who are not in service, always to do a self-check about our mental well-being. And I'm glad to say that veterans have a self-check that's available. We'll provide that link. You won't be asked to provide your name or any other information that identifies you, but it's a way of self-assessing to determine whether things are maybe getting a little challenging for you, might need help. And what is PTSD and how do you assess it? Well, if you're curious about that, it's one re-experiencing symptom where you're re-experiencing the event. You're avoiding things that are triggering the event, things that we call arousal and reactivity related to things that you may experience, and cognition and mood symptoms are included in that. And there's ways of screening for this as well. We have what's called a PTSD checklist, and then we have these diagnostic interviews that we can engage in to more fully probe the depth of the PTSD if that's in fact needed. But I would encourage everyone to do the self-assessment, and that'll be a useful guide. Now, if you're concerned about the fact that you might need help, of course, the first thing to do if you're in an urgent situation is to call 911, where you're thinking about hurting yourself or harming yourself. You're looking for ways to harm yourself, risky use of weapons. These are all very concerning behaviors where you want to get immediate help. I would also want to highlight that just very recently, the US government made a very wise investment into a new phone line for everyone to get help when they're in distress, and that's 988. It's the same number as they used to have, it's same service as they used to have before, but now it's only 3 digits, 988. And as it was before, if you push 1, you'll be able to access the service for veterans or anyone in the military. It's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Again, the number is 988. It's available 24 hours, 7 days a week. And again, if you're concerned about things like risky activities that you're engaged in, increasing alcohol and drug use, you're neglecting yourself, your own appearance, withdrawing from family and members, sad and depressed, all these things are important to reach out and contact the number in the here and now. If you want more ongoing help, we do have different types of approaches that can help, and things like cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure for PTSD. I talked about earlier about EMDR, and there's also applications that are available to supplement the use of therapies, things that will help with PTSD, and also supplements to that therapy called cognitive processing therapy. There's apps that can help support. So the VA has developed a number of apps that can be very helpful as a supplement to getting help. Wellspring offers support and therapy ongoing. And I just want to make the point that we found that some veterans prefer getting help outside of the VA, outside of the military service. So that's one of the benefits that we can offer at Wellspring. We offer EMDR therapy. We can do cognitive processing therapy, as I mentioned. We also have equine therapy, which is a great supplement to the other types of therapies. We talked about families, and we offer couples and families therapy as well. So both the individual and the family and the couple relationship can be addressed. We've talked a lot about concerns and issues that may come up in serving our country the way the military have. But I want to ask Meredith, because you've been through the experience. We talked about the challenges of military service, but can you address or talk about the value and the benefits of military service as well?
Yes, absolutely. I was thinking about that as well, Mark, because I'm thinking people are listening to this podcast, and one of the questions I get often is from parents saying, what's it like as a woman in the military if their daughter is considering joining? So I don't want any of those listeners to feel like there's no value or benefit in military service. In my experience, it was one of the most challenging, rewarding experiences of my life. And so again, the experience is different for everyone. Our point here is to kind of meet you where you're at. If you are an active duty service member, a veteran, a family member, and you connected to any of these challenges, we invite you to get help, to reach out, to find those resources. And we did want to highlight those. But also we want to highlight again how proud we are of our military service members. They are some of the most hardworking, proud people that I've ever met, and some of my best friends, and just the greatest people in the world, in my opinion, are in the military. So I did want to mention that, so it doesn't sound all doom and gloom. But again, this podcast, we're trying to point out some of those challenges that are very real for different service members, which may not apply to everyone.
Absolutely. And then that prospect of healing, which is what Wellspring is all about, specifically can apply to people who are serving, have served, and now that infuses that sense of hope. Oh, I know where to go and what help I can acquire. So, it's definitely to instill that hope and that encouragement. So I appreciate the two of you with all the information provided. And Meredith, your wealth of experience can be such a asset and such a benefit to others. And Mark, your work with people, struggling with PTSD and in various contexts will continue to serve the community well. So you guys are awesome, and I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So it's time to close our show today. We thank once more Mark and Meredith for joining us today as we broach this incredible topic of why mental health support is important in the military. And thank you for joining our show today. Again, if you joined this program midstream, you can find this show and others on podcasts at Wellspring on the Air or on our blog on wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show was precisely Why Mental Health Support is Important in the Military. Thank you for joining us. This is Mario Armas with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.